In this revision video, we're going to have a look at how to answer C questions. So what are the examiners expecting to see in a C question? Well, the first thing they're looking for is a comprehensive response with around 3 to 4 detailed paragraphs. Those paragraphs should include an explanation of the symbolism or importance of the issue, but also links to the impact it has on religious practice. It's essential in a C question that you have evidence and examples to support your points and that you have accurate use of key terms throughout your whole answer. Where possible, distinguish between different denominations. So let's have a look at an example. This question then asks you to explain the Muslim teachings on war and conflict. I would recommend that you highlight the trigger word explain. That tells you that you need to give a detailed account of the concept. I'd also recommend that you highlight the topic itself, war and conflict. The final thing I would highlight is the word teachings. As this question specifically asks for teachings, you need to make sure that your answer clearly refers to teachings from sacred texts or religious leaders like Prophet Muhammad. If you fail to make that clear, you are going to lose marks. Read the question really carefully. The question is worth 8 marks, so you've got 8 minutes to answer this question. In each of your paragraphs, I'd recommend that you follow a point, evidence, explain structure. However, you might find it useful to think of it in terms of belief, teaching or practice. So the point is what they believe or what they're taught. The evidence is the specific teaching or example. And then your explanation is how that belief and that teaching influences how a religious person acts or behaves. So let's have a look at an example of what I mean. So the first thing I'm going to do to answer this question is I'm going to give a 1-sentence overview of what either Muslims believe or are taught. So it might read something like, the teachings of Islam promote peace in times of conflict and suggest that violence is only ever a last resort. As you can see there, I'm making a very clear link back to the question by referring to teachings. So the next thing I need to do is I need to add some sort of evidence or example to support the point I've just made. So I might say something like, the Quran states, fight in the way of Allah against those who fight against you, but do not attack them first. Now remember, although I've chosen to use a direct quote here, I don't have to quote something word for it to count as evidence. It can be a summary of what a teaching says. The final thing I need to do in the paragraph is to explain how that evidence relates to the question itself. So how does what that teaching says relate to war and conflict? So my answer might say, Muslims interpret this to mean that only when attempts to promote peace have failed can violence or war be used, and only if it's for Allah. Muslims therefore follow the example set by Prophet Muhammad and will try to reconcile before violence. So that's one paragraph done. However, as it's a C question and is one of the bigger mark questions, we're aiming for around 3 to 4 paragraphs in total. So I'm going to repeat the process again now with another belief, teaching, practice structure or point, evidence, explain structure, however you prefer to remember it. So I'd say another important concept found in Islamic teaching is that of jihad. This means to struggle or strive for one's faith. There are 2 main types. Whilst the greater jihad refers to the inner personal struggle for faith, the lesser jihad can involve violence. Now I need to add a specific teaching or evidence to support that. I might say something like, in the Hadith, Prophet Muhammad states that violent jihad is inferior, but gave his followers authorization to fight with specific guidelines and principles, but only for the sake of Allah and their faith. You can see here that I'm not quoting Prophet Muhammad word for word, I'm summarising what he says. However, it still counts as evidence because I'm referring to the source itself, i.e. the Hadith and Prophet Muhammad. So to finish off that paragraph, I again need to link that to practice in some way. So I'd say something like, as such, Muslims will try to avoid war where possible through interfaith dialogue and reconciliation. However, when Allah or Islam is threatened, they will resort to war following the clear and specific guidelines set by Prophet Muhammad. Now you can see in this answer I'm maintaining lots of emphasis on teaching by making reference to Islamic teaching, Hadith, Prophet Muhammad. In order to ensure my answer is comprehensive as the examiners expect, I'm going to aim to include at least 1 more paragraph, if not 2. So my answer might continue as follows. In Islam, these holy wars are often referred to as military jihad. Sacred texts give clear guidance on what qualifies as legitimate reasons for a military jihad. These include defending Islam and Islamic values, strengthening Islam and fighting injustice. It cannot be done to gain power, land or wealth. For example, Muhammad Ali famously refused to fight during the war in Vietnam, saying, "War is against the teachings of the Holy Quran. We're not supposed to take part in no wars unless declared by Allah or the Messenger." As such, Muslims will often refuse to participate in state wars and instead become conscientious objectors. Time permitting, I'll add one final paragraph. It might read something like, "The Sharia law has also given additional guidance on the conditions and criteria for war. These include rules that innocent people should not be killed or hurt, women must not be abused in any way, prisoners must be treated with respect, and when the enemy surrenders, the violence stops. The Quran says, but if the enemy inclines towards peace, do thou also incline towards peace." This demonstrates the emphasis Muslim teachings place on peace and reconciliation. Now, hopefully you've noticed that throughout this response, I keep making subtle references back to teachings. I say things like sacred texts, I give specific quotes, I add things like the Sharia law. All of those things are to make sure that I'm meeting the demands of the question set. They don't have to be direct quotes for it to count as a teaching or a piece of evidence. So that gives you just a brief overview of how you answer these C questions. You need to have that point evidence explained structure, or you might find it easier to think of it as a belief teaching practice. You might find it useful to get into the habit of using similar openers and connectives for each of your belief teaching practice points. For example, you might say something like, Christians or Muslims believe this. This is based on the teachings of the Bible, the Quran, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and then finishing the paragraph by saying that Christians and Muslims interpret this to mean that they should do this. This structure can also be used in each of the paragraphs in your D questions.